And hello, welcome in. It is Priority Talk Radio. Greg Davis here with you this evening, and we are thrilled to have you with us here on Truth 101 WXJC, and we are thrilled to have a special guest in studio with us today. It's Mr. Rodney Orr, Mr. Tider Insider himself. Is that okay, Rodney?
That's perfectly
Mr. Tider
fine.
Insider.
I've been called a lot worse.
Rodney Orr in studio with us, and of course he's well known throughout the state from the Tider Insider website and television and radio, and just man, you've had a big media presence over the years, haven't you?
Yeah. I mean, I had a plan for that, and I didn't know if it'd come to fruition, but somehow it did. You know.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, and you are telling your story, and really the story somewhat of Alabama football, especially the last 30 years or so, in your book called Bigger Than Bama, The Inside Story of Tider Insider. And for those of you watching the video of this, there's the book. And our good friend Ray Mellick authored this with you, telling your story. And Ray's been a dear friend of mine over the years as well.
Man, fantastic guy. And, Ray really helped me weave all the stories together, into a story. And that was really the part that I think was most difficult. But Ray certainly did a great job helping. Yeah,
well, it's a great read. And I got started on it and read a couple of chapters at a time. And then earlier this week, I sat down to read again, thinking hopefully I can get through it by Friday, and boy, I just read straight through.
Yeah.
Once it got rolling, I couldn't put it down. Yeah. Quite honestly.
Yeah. Well, that's.
Do you hear that from other people?
I have, honestly. It's just getting enough people to read it.
Yeah. Now, how long's it been out?
Well, actually, our goal
last year
was to come out in December, right before Christmas, which we did, and then all of a sudden, Nick Saban steps down in January.
Yes.
And Ray and I had talked about that all through the fall. I said, Ray, what if?
Yeah.
And he said, Rodney, it's not the biggest part of the story.
No, it's not. It's not. And that part sort of got left hanging.
Yeah.
You weren't able to close that
chapter. We'll
chapter.
do that next time, hopefully.
Do that next time. Well, I love it. Bigger Than Bama. It's the inside story of Tider Insider. And, you've got a real message in this, not just that, I would say for you, I think you say in the book that through your journey, through your story, you've learned there's more to life than just Alabama football.
Oh, 100%. But
that wasn't always true.
No.
You didn't. No. The little bit we've talked, Alabama football consumed you from even a young age.
As crazy as it sounds, I was an addict.
Wow.
I was addicted to Alabama football. It was my obsession. And people say, how could that come about? How does that happen? And really, we moved to Corpus Christi, Texas from Mobile, Alabama.
6 years old?
Yeah, well, right before I turned 6,
okay.
1966, early January 66. So we get to Texas. I had no idea we were from Alabama, okay? I mean, nobody ever told me, we're from Alabama. And we get to Texas, and they told me I was from Alabama. And when I say that, I mean, back in those times in the 60s, there's a really rough time. And if you were from Alabama, you were kind of frowned upon. So we got called a lot of names and stuff by people from other parts of the country who had been also transferred in to that area. And so one day I just asked my older brother Don, who's 9 years older than me, I was like, do you hear what they're saying about us? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, why are they saying these things? And he said, well, they're jealous. And I'm like, they don't sound jealous, And so then he went on to tell me about, well, it's Alabama football. We're number one. And that's why they're jealous. And he told me we won the national championships in 1964. We won it in 65. We should have won it this year. But they kept it from us. They ripped us off.
Yeah, the polling and all that.
Whatever the word was. They ripped us off.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And he said, so anytime somebody says something to you about being from Alabama, you just tell them Alabama's number one. See, now, I want to stop right there and say this. I want you to think about it. I was 5 years old still, almost 6. He planted a seed inside of me that would become an obsession that would bring me right where I am today, right where I'm here today. So what's the point? The point is our words are extremely powerful. They can set the tone even for a 5-year-old child's future.
Wow.
I didn't realize it at the time, but he planted that seed, and it just blew up into an obsession.
So the rest of your childhood into middle school, high school, you're following Alabama football obsessively from Corpus Christi, Texas, and that wasn't so easy to do back in those days.
No,
you couldn't get the Tuscaloosa News. I mean, you weren't getting, there wasn't a website to go to read about all of this. How'd you do that?
Well, I always tell people that, I remind them it's not always been like it is now.
Yeah.
The coverage just wasn't there. Corpus Christi.
You couldn't even listen on the radio.
Couldn't listen on the radio, and so what I did in high school, I finally figured out a plan because I was so frustrated. I would only get a little blurb in the Sunday paper of how the games went. So I said, man, what can I do? So I called my oldest brother, Dalton, who lived in Mobile. And I said, hey, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to take your phone and set it by the radio, turn it on the Alabama game. And don't forget now, at this point in time, long-distance fees were 15, 20 cents a minute.
Yeah.
And I'd listen to the first half. We'd hang up at halftime. I'd call back 15 minutes later. We'd listen to the second half. And he'd say, hey, midway through the fourth quarter, Alabama's up 45-0. Why don't you save some money? And I'd say, no, I got to listen to the final stats. And so with all that said, my dad obviously was not too thrilled when the bill came in. So he blames my mom, right? Yeah. He tells my mom, you allowed this to happen. You let him do this. So my mom goes to the local Radio Shack there in Corpus Christi, and she tells the clerk that she needs the tallest antenna they have. He asked, what's the purpose of the antenna? She said, well, my son's obsessed with Alabama football. I want to get a tall antenna to put on top of our roof so he can pick up those Alabama stations and not make those long-distance phone calls. The clerk laughed, said, ma'am, there's no such antenna. So I kept listening to Alabama games long distance.
Wow.
And I had eventually got a job, so I paid out of my pocket to listen to those games.
And really your dream, as I read the book all these years, was to somehow be involved with the program, maybe even to be like the announcer or something like that.
The voice of Alabama,
Because I guess you're listening to who was it? John Forney.
Yeah.
Through those years. And so you're thinking, I'm not going to be a player, maybe.
Yep.
You're like me, smaller stature. We're not big enough, maybe. But I can be involved in the program. That was a dream.
It was a dream. I mean, it was like an obsession. I'd go out in my front yard on Saturdays, in the late 60s, early 70s. And, of course, I was the star player running the option. I've told Gary Rutledge this story many times, or a couple of times, that I was him.
Yeah.
I wore his jersey, and I pretended to be running the option, and I would be play-by-play calling my action. So, anyway, with that said, that kind of became the session, And, again, I go back to words, because I would tell my friends in high school and leading up to high school, one day I'm going to go to school at Alabama. And to be honest with you, Greg, I didn't really believe that.
Yeah.
I would say it over and over and over again, but I thought it was just a far-fetched dream.
Yeah.
And I would say, I'm going to one day be doing what I'm doing right now. I'm going to be covering Alabama one day. I don't think I believed that. I said it over and over and over and over again. Again, the power of words, I was expressing my heart. And lo and behold, eventually it all came to fruition.
It all worked. Yeah, it all worked out. So, but you go to work. You grow up. Well, you do wind up at Alabama.
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm right. So you start off in college there and then transfer. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I went to a junior college, but I was not a very good high school student, to be honest with you. Matter of fact, I'll tell you, I had a 1.6 GPA because I spent most of my time at the beach. Okay, but I would say, hey, I'm going to school at Alabama one day. My friends would say, Rodney, don't you think you need to graduate from high school first?
Yeah.
And but so I went to a local junior college there in Corpus Christi, Del Mar, and finished there. And I was going to the University of Alabama. We came here in the summer of '81. We drove, me and my parents, for orientation. And I guess about 3/4 of the way, I started having doubts. And by the time we got to Tuscaloosa that night, back then I used a payphone. I called my best friend in Corpus Christi and I said, hey, I'm not coming here. And he's like, how long you been there? I'm like, 10 minutes. And he said, well, what's going on? I said, it's too far away from home.
Long way.
So I decided that, okay, Alabama was going to always be my favorite team. I'd be the biggest Alabama fan, but I could never go to school here because it's too far from home, too far from my friends, whatever. So two of my best friends said, hey, go back to Del Mar for a while, enroll at the University of Texas for next year. So I sent in my application for the University of Texas, and in May of 82, I was going to start in fall of 82, I get a notification from the University of Texas saying they had denied 17 hours for my junior college transcript. So my buddy's like, hey, man, we really want you in Austin, but, here's what you need to do. Instead of going to Del Mar, come up to Austin and go to Austin Community College, live here for a semester, and then you enroll in Texas in January. Well, my mom figured out the plan, okay? She's like, why should we spend all this money for you to go? And I say all that to say, I want to make a point, is when my mom approached me in July of 1982 and told me I could not go to Austin to go to a community college, I had to stay and go to the local community college again. Within an instant, it hit me. Just like the snap of the finger. And I'm like, Mom, I don't want to go to Austin Community College. I don't want to go to the University of Texas. I'm going to Alabama. And it hit me that fast. And, I've got a story in there about that. Yeah. And that is a moment that you never forget. Because, Greg, when I tell you, it was, some people say fate, whatever it was, I say the Holy Spirit just moved upon me at that very moment, instantly. Yeah. And next thing I know, 6, 7, 8 weeks later, I'm in Tuscaloosa. I would have never dreamed that. But all of a sudden, I'm fulfilling my dream and going to school at the university.
Now, the biggest part of your story in this book that you're sharing and that you're out speaking and telling people about is obviously the God story. And so this early part of your life, you mentioned the Holy Spirit, looking back on it. Yeah. Where was God? What was the relationship? Family, what was going on there? Yeah,
like my mom was one of the greatest Christian ladies. She was a tremendous influence on my life, impact. And I tell the story, she had me in church Sunday night, Wednesday night, and I'd constantly try to figure out ways to not go. I'd stick the thermometer under the hot water and stuff like that. And she said she'd always tell me, one day, you're going to thank me for making you go. And so she laid the foundation. And again, I go back to what the Bible says, train up a child the way they should go, and they will come back to it. And my mom was really faithful about that. And my dad, he had been a Baptist deacon, but he got out of the church when we moved to Texas, okay? And he kind of lost his way. And that's kind of what I grew up in, watching my dad, and I emulated the things I saw from him later when I grew up and had my own family. But I have to say this, to honor my dad, the last 20 years of his life, he got back in relationship with the Lord and was the kind of man that he was designed to be.
But I hear you saying what you saw growing up when he was sort of out during those formative years affected you and your family in the years to come.
Tremendous.
And we're going to get into more of that. The inside story of Tighter Insider with Rodney Orr. It's bigger than Bama, and there's more to life than just Alabama football, and you go full circle on all this. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, let's take a break. We'll come back on the other side more with Mr. Rodney Orr. Thank you for being with us. We're back in and continuing our conversation here on Priority Talk with Mr. Rodney Orr with Tighter Insider, and he's sharing about his story of his life and Alabama football, the inside story of Tighter Insider, bigger than Bama. And of course, Tighter Insider is a website that you and your brother launched back in like '96. That's really become, to a great degree, really the hub of information for Alabama football, and even beyond that to some degree. And so have been very successful and very, I would say, influential as well. So those of you wondering, the Tighter Insider is the site. I should have mentioned that earlier. But you get to Tuscaloosa, and if I remember right, you're kind of in a dorm building or a living facility, and one of the guys there in the building is someone who one day comes on to be a pretty well-known person, and he played an important role as well. Yeah,
John Merrill. I never forget, walked in.
Who became Secretary of State.
Became Secretary of State. John I told John when we first met, he was an 18-year-old freshman. To be honest with you, he was from Heflin, Alabama, and I was from South Texas. I'd never seen anyone so country and so naive as John Merrill at that time. Okay, so John asked me what I wanted to do, and I told him, this is what I want to do, which is obviously cover Alabama. And I said, what do you want to do? He said, one day I'm going to be the president of the United States. So I always remind him, John, I fulfilled my part of it. Now it's up to you. So I met John. He's the first person I met, and Rayford Coleman was the residential assistants there, or director, and those were the two people I met. And we were in this dorm, and it was no air conditioning. Can you imagine in this Alabama heat? I'm like, wow. First thing I did was go to the mall and get a fan.
Yes.
But yeah. So it was incredible. We lived in Hayden Harris dorm on the university campus, and we had a great camaraderie with our all of our guys there. There was only 25 of us, so we're really close. And believe it or not, a lot of us still communicate to this day, and it's been 40 plus years.
Yeah, but he sees something in you, or
Yeah.
that your knowledge of
It's
Alabama
crazy.
football. He was
Yeah.
blown away by, wasn't he?
Yeah, he really was. And we would sit in the TV room because it was the only air-conditioned room in the whole building, right? So I would narrate basically the games we'd be watching on Thursday night or whatever, and I would tell these guys about, okay, this guy's from Philadelphia, and he went to LaSalle High School, and he did this, this, and this. And John would say, you know, Rodney, he said, I've never really met anyone like you in my life that knows all these stats and all of this about players. And he said, but wait a minute. He said, I do know one guy. He's from my hometown. And that was the end of it. And I remember that, Greg. I remember him saying that. That was in 1982. So 20 years later, you know, I bump into John. Of course, I'd seen him several times, you know, in recent time to that. But so 2002, he says, one night I bump into him at a BP convenience store, and he says, hey, he says, you remember that story about me telling you that there's a guy that reminded me of you that from my hometown? And I was like, yeah, I remember that, John. And he said, do you know who that guy is? I said, no, you never told me. He said, he sits next to you every Tuesday night on Tighter and Cider TV.
Gary Harris.
Gary Harris. And I was like, wow, you're kidding me. You know, that story 20 years ago, I remembered him telling me, and here Gary and I had been sitting next to each other for, at that time, a few years. Now we've been doing the show. This is our 25th year.
Wow, yeah.
I mean, it just goes to tell you what a small world.
Yeah, it
you
certainly
know?
is. Well, talk to us about family, because you work and you continue to follow football, and you meet who will become your wife, Andrea. Just sort of tell us that story, because that becomes the key thread through your book.
Okay, so I'll start this off this way.
Okay.
You called her Andrea. I called her Andrea.
Okay, did I say it wrong?
I did too. And, you know, I never forget, this is the kind of person she really was. She stopped me after a couple of weeks and me referring to her as Andrea. She said, look, everything's really good. You know, I really like everything about you, but if you don't mind, my name's Andrea.
Andrea, okay.
And she said, I don't like Andrea. And I said, okay, for sure. It's Andrea from now on.
Guess you could say it either way.
Yeah. So anyway, what happened was my dream was to, as we mentioned, cover Alabama. I got into sportscasting in Jackson, Mississippi, right out of college here at Alabama. Shortly after 6 months.
Television,
yeah, television, and I was there 2 years. It really wasn't for me. I wasn't really mature enough for the job, to be honest with you. Made a lot of mistakes, and called me in on my 26th birthday and said, look, it just didn't work out, so we're going to have to let you go. And I moved back to Texas in 1987, okay? And eventually I'm unemployed. I'm unemployed for 2 years and 8 months. I did a few odds and ends things, but I mean, in that 2 years and 8 months, I took time to reflect on all of my mistakes and the things that I had done in my job and the mistakes that I had made. I didn't blame the management for firing me. I took responsibility.
And you go into that in the book, a lot of the mistakes you made.
Yeah. And so, but in this process, I ultimately find a job, and shortly after I found the job with BFI, which was a waste management company, international waste management company, I met Andrea, and we started drawing closer, and then in 1990, we got married, and she had 2 young children, a 4-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son.
And their names?
The daughter is Vanessa, and the son, Brandon.
Brandon, all right, because I know we'll get back to that, certainly. And so she believes in you that you can cover Alabama football and do it. Yeah. She really inspires you to it.
Oh, 100%. I tell everybody she pushed me into my destiny. And I would tell her my dream all the time. And, again, I had a good job. I was very successful. I won a lot of awards as a salesman. And we were doing fine, living in Corpus Christi, making a good, decent enough living. And everyone was happy and content, right? But it wasn't my dream. It wasn't my passion. Covering Alabama was my passion. And by this time now, 1992, we have our first child, Natalie. And we're starting to get a little bit deeper into, that. So I'm like, my dream's never going to come true. And she said, oh yeah, one day it's going to happen. One day it's going to happen. And how did it happen? My brother told me about the internet, and this is 1994, and I had never heard of the internet. Yeah. And he said, I can build you a website and you can reach Alabama fans all over the world. And I'm thinking, I don't think so. Not
sure if that's going to take off or not.
Yeah. So about 2 years later, I'm still just trying to find I wanted to buy a magazine. I wanted to start a magazine, do whatever I could. And I want to tell you this story real quickly, if I can. Mm-hmm. In this process, I decided to call an expert up in Philadelphia of starting up this type of service. And we have a 45-minute conversation. My wife and my daughter Natalie were downstairs at my parents' pool. I'm upstairs. Make this phone call to this guy. We talk 45 minutes. By the time we get off the phone, he tells me, you got 2 chances for your dream to come true. And I said, okay. He said, slim and none. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was really discouraged. I go downstairs, and Andrea's sitting at the pool. She could read me like a book. And she's sitting there, and she goes, what's wrong with you, Rod? I said, I just got off the phone with that expert in Philadelphia. And he said, my chances are slim and none. She kind of laughed. She said, Rod, let me ask you a question. She said, are you going to believe some guy in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, you don't even know? Or are you going to believe the dream God put in your heart? Mm. And I said, right now, I'm believing the guy in Philadelphia. And she says, Rod, it's going to happen. Trust me. You see, she was pushing me into my destiny.
Mm-hmm. And she was a Christian lady, faithful.
Yeah.
You put a lot of notes that she wrote you in the book, mm-hmm. things to encourage you along the way.
Right.
Maybe you were struggling. She was a spiritual rock, really, is the way I took it from you, right?
Oh, no doubt. Really what it was I was like a lot of men. We're trying to find our identity, and we're trying to find it through what we do.
What our job is. And I
couldn't quite get where I wanted to be, even though I had a lot of success as a salesperson. It wasn't my passion. I knew there was more that I wanted. And, so I was trying to find that. The crazy thing is she accepted me just the way I was. I mean, she wanted me to reach my goals because they were my dreams. But she would have been fine no matter what, but not me.
Yeah.
And like you said, she was a strong Christian, and I was not who I was supposed to be. I was not spiritually mature.
You were sort of modeling like a lot of what you saw at home, where your mother during your growing up years was more really the spiritual leader. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah, no doubt.
And now you're sort of that's sort of playing out in your own family now.
It was the blueprint. It was what I saw. I saw my mom all through those years because my dad, like I said, when he got out of church, frankly, I heard a lot of verbal abuse. I heard a lot of things that I should not have heard, mm-hmm. and this should not have been said. A lot of respect was torn down in our home. But it's what I grew up with. It's what I saw. So when I got into my family relationship with Andrea and the kids and all that, I carried that into our relationship, you see, because it's what I had experienced. And I thought I'd be just like my dad. I wouldn't have to change. And Andrea would be just like my mom. She wouldn't change.
But it didn't play out that way.
Did not.
Well, you guys make the big break, and at her encouraging, if I read it right, move to Tuscaloosa. You leave this job that's doing well for you, and basically move to Tuscaloosa on a dream.
On a whim, really. Yeah. I mean, it happened that fast.
Put the house up for sale, and we're moving.
18 months after Tighter and Cider started in a little room in Corpus Christi, Texas, I was making more money on that than I was on my 10-year job with BFI. Wow. And she just said one Sunday, she said, hey, I got to ask you a question. I said, yeah, sure. What do you think about moving to Tuscaloosa? taking Tighter Insider full time.
Because here you are with Tighter Insider going, but you're in court. You're not even in Tuscaloosa
I'm not
to
even
even know what's going on.
Right.
You're doing it from a distance.
You're doing it from a distance, just on the internet, And like I said, we had so many members, and at that time, you have to remember, I was like the first that covered Alabama in that way.
Yeah.
So timing was perfect for me.
Yeah.
And with that said, I still remember. I can still picture her standing to my left in the kitchen and just saying, "Hey, what do you think about that? What do you think about moving to Tuscaloosa?" And my first reaction was, "Andrea, we can't do that. We just had our 4th child. Madeline, my youngest daughter, was only 5 months old at the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's hard to do.
Yeah. And I'm like, common sense says you can't do that. And that's what I explained to her real quickly. And she said, "Well, Rod, let me ask you a question." She said, moving to Tuscaloosa to cover Alabama is part of your business plan. It's a major part of your business plan. Am I correct? And I said, yes. And she said, "It's your dream, isn't it?" And I said, yes. And she said, "Well, Rod, sometimes you just have to take a step of faith." And, I talked about the moment when I decided to go to school at Alabama. Was something I would never forget. This was another moment, because as soon as she said those words, I had a sense of peace overtake me, that it was the right thing to do. So I said, "Put the house up for sale tomorrow. We're gonna do this."
Yeah. Well, you moved to Tuscaloosa, and I want to share this out of the book, and there's much of this in here, but a letter that she wrote you. It's my prayer for you, dear Rodney. It's my prayer for you that as you read this Bible, so she's given you a Bible.
For Christmas
For
in
Christmas,
98, yeah.
That the Holy Spirit will give you spiritual understanding through your prayer life and devotion time with Him, that He may bless the rest of your life with all peace and love that He is all about. I also pray that through His Word it will help you to be the husband and the father God intended you to be, and that we can grow in God together to have a rich and blessed marriage. I love you with all my heart, Andrea. That was her.
Well, it was her. It was her, and it didn't mean much to me at the time.
Yeah. So you're going to move, and professionally, Tighter Insider, that story is written. People know the success of that. But behind that, what a lot of us who see you on TV or hear you on the radio may not have known was that living in Tuscaloosa, that home and family was falling apart in many, many ways. All right, we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll explore some of that. Greg Davis here with you. Priority Talk Radio. It's good news, Christian values here on Truth 101 WXJC. And, we're glad you're with us this evening. If you're just joining us, we are visiting with Mr. Rodney Orr. We're talking about the inside story of Tighter Insider, and it's telling it in his new book, Bigger Than Bama. And we are, you're giving us a lot, Rodney. I mean, most people would not be comfortable sharing a lot of the things that you share in this book about their own failings and troubles and their family and what goes on. So while we see you having incredible professional success, you moved to Alabama right during sort of the end of the Stallings era, and again, all this book's weaved in with a lot of Alabama football stories, inside stuff, the things that you broke on the website and how you were able to break those stories, because that's really what built the popularity of the website and the message boards, was that you had put yourself in a position, or God had put you in a position to where you were a reliable source for what was happening or what might come with recruiting, commitments, players, coaching changes, what was going on behind the scenes in the football building. I mean, if you want Alabama stories behind the scenes, this book is for you. But as well, while all of that is just going great, and you take Tighter Insider to a subscription model, and you didn't know what would happen there, but it grows and does well. You've had to adjust with the business trends over the years, and you've been able to navigate that. You've had opportunities to sell the website, sell the business. You haven't done that because you enjoy doing it. You wanted it to remain pure, I guess, is really a good way. So all of this professional success, you've become from coaching. People got to remember you had one coach after another there.
Yeah.
From Stallings to DeBose to Franchione to Price to
There
Shula.
was a run.
So there was a lot to cover in
yeah,
there.
yeah.
A lot of changes, a lot of things a lot of interest.
Yeah.
And so while you're doing all this at home, things began to break down. You've admitted you weren't being the spiritual leader that you should have been, and maybe really didn't know how to be.
Yeah.
But your wife, Andrea, I got it right now.
Right.
I got it. I read it as Andrea the whole way. Andrea.
Yeah, that's okay.
She like what happened to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. She got prescribed some medicines that were popular at that time, over prescribed, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And fell into an addiction. Just tell it how you want to tell it.
Well, let's go back to what you said about the success, and behind the success that I was having, it takes a toll, because to do that, it takes time, takes effort, takes attention, and my priorities kind of flipped a little bit, and my whole focus was on Tighter and Cider, covering Alabama, following Alabama. In the process, I left my wife out. Didn't have time for that relationship, and I put the kids on her. If something went right, great. If it didn't, it's her fault. That's kind of the way it became. And so really, I lost contact with my wife, and she sent many messages to me. Hey, we're like two ships passing in the night.
Yeah. You have one in the book. She writes a note and says, I want to spend one whole day with you, undisturbed, or something like that.
Yeah, that was Sunday at church.
Yeah.
She said, "You think you can make time for me?"
Well,
and I'll never forget. She finally demanded that I take her to dinner one night. So I took her to Outback Steakhouse, and when we sat down at the table, sitting across from her, just like this right here, I had a very vague and uncomfortable feeling overtake me the moment we sat down. And I realized in that moment that I didn't know her anymore. We had nothing in common. We had lost contact. And she made a comment, Rod, we just don't seem to know each other anymore. And I ignored it, but that's exactly the way I was feeling. And I tell people all the time, had I been spiritually mature at that point, I would have known that was a message, that was something from God. And I could have said, Andrea, we got to get that corrected right now. But see, I wasn't in tune. I couldn't comprehend what it really meant. And my only thing was, hey, as soon as we get out of here, I'm getting back to the computer and I'm going back to work. Yeah. It was such an odd feeling. But anyway, I saw that. That's kind of how things started.
Yeah.
And it started slipping, and I started not really keeping up with what was going on with my family, with her, and all of these things. And one day, she was having trouble finishing tasks. She goes to the doctor, and they put her on a drug called Adderall. Well, I was naive about drug addiction. I never knew that prescription drugs, you could get addicted to them. I thought, it's only people who shoot up heroin, hard drugs, whatever it is. And my father-in-law had been in pharmaceutical sales, and he warned me. He said, look, this isn't good that she's gotten on these on Adderall, because it's a very highly addictive drug, and never would have thought. But a year after she got on it, one day she shows up at my computer. I'm sitting there, and she's crying. I could hear the teardrops just bouncing off the floor. When I turn around, I'm like, what happened? You think something happened with one of my kids?
Right.
And she said, I got arrested. And I'm like, you what? I mean, the spiritual pillar of our home, my wife, the person that I believed in more than anyone, you got arrested? Wow. For what? I stole a prescription pad from my doctor's office, and I forged his name. And that was really my first, I don't want to say indication, but when I finally got an understanding, we got a problem here, And
it was a big problem.
It was a big problem. It was, I talked to the drug enforcement agent. She got off light punishment. She was really remorseful. And the drug enforcement said, look, that's a sure sign of addiction. But I'm saying, no, my wife wouldn't. She's not addicted. She'll learn from this. I didn't change. Things got worse with me. The way I treated her, verbal abuse. Again, I go back to what I said earlier about my dad. I heard that, and I carried that into my relationship with her. And So things continued on that path, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And to be honest with you, I ignored it. I just focused on my job, my business, and my mom would say, you got some problems that you need to address, and I didn't address them. And it just festered and festered and festered. And by 2005, never forget the summer of 2005, I got a call from a friend of mine, or neighbor, and he said, look, Andrea has stolen some Adderall out of our pantry, or our medicine cabinet, and I'm going to call the law. I'm calling the police unless you're willing to do something about it. And I said, listen, I said, I got a problem here, and I don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to help you. He said, she's an addict. I was an addict. My wife was an addict. And we're going to come over to your house, and we're going to do an intervention.
Yeah.
And they convinced her to go into drug rehab. And as naive as I was about it, I thought 30 days in a drug rehab was going to change everything, and it didn't. And that she walked that. She actually literally, Greg, I was going on live on my TV show, which goes throughout most of the state of Alabama, right?
Yeah.
I'm going on live, and I get a phone call, and they're like, Mr. Orr, we hate to inform you, but your wife has walked out of the program. She's in a downtown area, and this is not a real safe area where she was. And, there's nothing we can really do about it. She came home. I met with the counselors at the drug rehab. They said, we can't help her. She needs more intensive help. So 2 days later, I took her to a program down in South Mississippi, in Summit, Mississippi, where she was going to stay for like 3 months, 2 or 3 months, depending on how she progressed. And, I want to say this. She was gone that whole time till that I took her in early September. She got out near Thanksgiving. And every day seemed like months. I mean, because I'm sitting there and I'm reflecting on all of the mistakes I had made as a husband. All of the things. All I'm really wanting is my wife back, and me to be who she always prayed for me to be, the spiritual leader of our home, be the husband, the father. And I'm thinking, okay, when she gets out of this program, this is a top program, she's going to be okay.
Yeah.
She gets out. A week later, she's back on Adderall.
And this tumbles on to eventually divorce, which you thought would be the worst day of your life.
Yeah, I did. When she gets out, she gets back on Adderall, and that was in November of 2005. We're moving into 2006, okay? And by the summer of 2006, she's collapsing. She's going down fast. And I find out that we took a trip to South Texas to see some family, and one of my brothers called and said, hey, while y'all were here, she allowed your daughter Natalie, who was only 13 at the time, to smoke marijuana and drink while they were visiting some other family. And I'm like, wow. He says, you got to do something, and do something drastic, and do it immediately. How do you handle that?
Yeah.
I just said, Lord, I really don't know what to do. So I need your guidance. And a couple weeks later, I'm reading the Bible, and it just hit me while I was reading Proverbs that, when you wink at sin, it can bring grief. You can't wink at sin. You have to address it. I knew if I left my kids in that situation, we could be potentially in trouble.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so that's when I said, I've got to get a divorce.
Yeah. And you think that would be the worst day of your life, but unfortunately there was going to be a worse one coming later on.
Yeah. That was in September of 2006, and the last month of her life, she had 5 car accidents. Now, let me say this, preface that, saying she had several car accidents leading up to. She was arrested multiple times. She really wasn't my wife anymore.
Yeah.
She wasn't
person.
the woman I knew. And so on March 7, 2007, that afternoon, my daughter Vanessa, her husband had a motorcycle accident. And within an hour or so after the accident, he passed away. An hour and a half later, Andrea had a separate accident, and she passed away. So we had double tragedy that night.
Within just a couple of hours,
Yep.
your daughter loses her husband, and then she loses her mother,
Mm-hmm.
and you lose your ex-wife.
Yeah. Yeah, and let me be clear.
Well, it's amazing. The book just, I was about to cry myself, man, reading the book.
And
I had no idea.
Yeah, and you're right. Let me say this. She was my ex-wife, but I never stopped taking care of her.
Yeah.
I took care of her. I was not going to turn my back on her because I knew who she really was, right? Yeah. And so it was like losing my wife.
Yeah.
And then so
sure.
it's really like people say, well, they don't understand. But it's like someone having a sickness, an illness, and just watching them fade away and ultimately die. And that's what that addiction was. And so after she passes away, and we can go back to the first part of this. My stepson, Brandon, who had been a two-sport athlete at Alabama.
Playing football and baseball, quarterback at Alabama.
Played outfield, was a really potentially outstanding baseball player. Jim Wells, who was a great coach at Alabama, told me, he said in 3 years he could be, a top draft pick. And so with all that said, he was addicted to prescription drugs. And so when his mother died, he was facing 5 years in prison for drug trafficking. I was dealing with that. Vanessa had lost her mother and her husband in the same night. Natalie was smoking, drinking, and threatening suicide. That was my 14-year-old daughter. Yeah. And Madeline, our little 9-year-old daughter, she had seen more in her lifetime than most people see, right? Yeah. And she's like, Dad, did Mom even love me? So I'm sitting here, all of these things on my plate, not to mention the hurt and pain that I had. And all of this. I'm dealing with all this stuff. I'll never forget standing in my kitchen. It felt like an EF5 tornado had swept through. I tell this in the book.
Yeah.
Debris was everywhere. The debris was my family. We're in chaos. And I'm like, Lord, I can't do this, but you can.
Mr. Rodney Orr, he tells this story and really so much more in his book, Bigger Than Bama, The Inside Story of Tighter Insider. We'll take a break and come back on the other side with some more, and we'll get to the hopeful point of this and where you want to see this go and what you feel like God is really leading you toward. Very interesting. All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. All right, we're back in, and we're continuing our conversation with Mr. Rodney Orr. He's written his book along with our friend Ray Mellick, Bigger Than Bama, The Inside Story of Tighter Insider. And Rodney, I just keep going back to that. People hearing your story, but there was more to life than just Alabama football. And your family now, you've given us those circumstances. Of course, you lost your wife, a son-in-law, unrelated, but tragedy. Kids are in sort of chaos. The good news, some of the good news is Brandon. I was hopeful that the story wasn't going to continue to go all negative.
Yeah.
Brandon did get it turned around.
Yeah, he did.
After playing quarterback at Alabama, even started some, played. He was quarterback. Many people may remember. Was an outstanding baseball player, and got in drugs. Yeah. Bounced around from here to there. But give folks an update now.
Yeah, honestly, I thought he would be the next one to go.
It sure seemed that way.
Yeah, and he was headed, like I said, 5 years in prison, and thankfully, I met with the judge, and I told the judge, I said, hey, he's not a criminal. He's an addict. And the judge allowed him to go to a program called Teen Challenge. And I found a Teen Challenge in Iowa that fit him really well and sent him up there. He went up there in like 2009 and spent like a year and a half there, became a counselor in that program, and eventually married the daughter of the director of the program. Wow. And now Brandon he got his degree in theology. And he has Ascended Life Ministries out of Des Moines, Iowa. He travels the world, ministering, goes into parts of Africa where you can't even reach him on the cell phone. Wow. And he makes these trips regularly. He's on a reservation, Indian reservation in South Dakota. He built a disciple center for First Nations people that they train them up and send them out. Yeah. So, all of this has happened. I tell people in 2010, he was still facing 5 years in prison before this case is finished, and he finishes his program. He was facing 5 years in prison, right? By 2011, by the summer of 2011, he's married. Now he has 7 kids. Wow. When I tell you it's a miraculous story, because honestly, Greg, I can't tell you how I felt so strongly that he probably wouldn't make it, because I saw what happened with his mother.
Yeah.
It took a miracle. It took an absolute miracle.
Wow. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And your daughters are
doing well. Vanessa's doing well. Natalie is the owner of a boutique, there in Tuscaloosa. Madeline, they're all doing really well.
And you certainly had to step up beyond any thing you had probably previously done, and be the spiritual leader and just be dad. You started getting the priorities more in order.
I had one choice.
Yeah.
Either become that guy, or my whole family was going to collapse.
Yeah.
And I love my kids way too much.
Amen. That's right.
But that's what it took.
Yeah.
That's what it took for me to become the man, the father, the person that God designed me to be. But here's the crazy thing about it. Andre had been telling me for years and years and years, Rod, I know who you are.
Yeah.
I know who you are. Right before she died, she said, I see you becoming exactly every single thing that I prayed for you to become. But again, it took the tragedy for me to get there.
Yeah, and you found some note. We don't have to go into it.
Yeah,
People
right.
can read the book, but you find some notes that she had written after she passes away that were just it'll send chills up and down your spine. It's just an almost unbelievable. Without God, it's an unbelievable story.
It really is. And like you said, that's in the book, but I'll say this just real quickly, because I want people to know this. The worst thing that can ever happen is when you love someone that way and they suddenly, or they're gone, they're dead. They can't talk back to you.
Yeah.
You cannot get that conflict resolved, I thought. But through a miraculous story that I tell in the book, God gave me what I needed.
Gave you that, yeah. You were able to close that door.
Right.
So sort of come to peace with it.
Sure.
Well, beautiful. And look, you're out sharing your story through the media, in churches, men's groups, really anywhere.
Recovery centers.
Yeah. So you're out sharing your story. You're available if people want to reach out to you. Certainly tell people how they can get the book and how they can reach out to you.
Yeah. And let me say this. People say, why is it bigger than Bama?
Yeah.
And because Alabama football was my passion for all my life. I told you the story. This is my passion now. It's bigger than Bama to tell this story. And because I've learned that pain used for purpose creates passion. So now I have that passion to share this story that I've shared with you, with people who are struggling, because you want to give them hope. Because I can see the potential in other people, but I want to share with them. So this is my passion. And like you said, I'm open to any speaking engagement that is out there for an opportunity. But the book is available on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon, but also we'd prefer you go to rodneyorr.com and you can order it there. It's really directly from the publisher, Bill Nawyer, Crest Publishing. But that's where we would like for you to go, is rodneyorr.com, but it's certainly available on Amazon as well.
Well, I want to encourage a lot of our pastors and men's group leaders, reach out to Rodney through the website, rodneyorr.com, and talk to him about coming out and sharing with your group. Look, we've just touched the surface, really, of what all you share in the book, and all the different ways that I think God can lead you to speak to men and to families and addicts, and there's so much there. I wish we could probably talk for 4 hours here about all of this. But let me say, also in the book, your story is what this is about, that it's bigger than Bama. Finding God and getting all of that straight is much more to life than just Alabama football, and that's a message a lot of people need to hear. Mm-hmm. We always say, football's a great hobby, but a pretty lousy God, and you have experienced that to some degree. Yeah. And through the book, though, you do tell a lot of interesting behind-the-scenes type Alabama stories. So let me just think. Of course, you give a broad swipe of Alabama football from the 60s on forward, really. But then from when you start Tighter Insider in the mid-90s with Gene Stallings, so from Gene Stallings resigning, you knew about it ahead of time, to Mike DeBose and how that all came together with him getting the job there, all the way to him being let go. There was an affair there. in the building, to Dennis Franchione and what all went on there, to Mike Price. I mean, you have got behind-the-scenes stories in all of these. In Alabama football, and Mike Shula, and Alabama football was really struggling. It was kind of a hot mess for the first 10, 11 years of Tider Insider.
Yeah.
And then you also tell in a lot of detail from your perspective, being sort of the insider, about Nick Saban and how all of that came together.
Yeah.
Got a couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Just tease that out a little bit, how that came together.
Yeah, well,
from your perspective.
Yeah, Mike Shula, 2006, of course, was a coach, and things weren't going well. They lost to Tennessee, and fans were getting a little bit disgruntled and what have you. And I got a call one day after they lost to Mississippi State in November. Really good source said, "What would you think about Nick Saban being the next coach?" I'm thinking it's a joke, right? But anyway, as time goes on and Alabama loses to LSU, they lose to Auburn, it becomes just a given. Mike Shula's gone, right? So who's going to be the next coach? And my sources are telling me the number one candidate is Nick Saban. And I trust my sources. And people are telling me publicly, you're wrong. This isn't going to shoot. He's not coming, right? And even Saban himself says he's not coming, But I'm listening to my sources behind the scenes. But I'll tell you one quick story. I get a call, and this is in the midst of Andrea's addiction, and I'm trying to cover the greatest story of my career while I'm experiencing the greatest tragedy of my life. But I never forget one night, I get a call, and it was from a source inside Jimmy Sexton's office. Of course, Jimmy Sexton's the agent for Nick Saban. And he says, "Hey, Alabama's about to make the biggest mistake in college football history." I said, "By hiring Rodriguez?" He said, "By not waiting on Nick. Nick wants the job." So Rodriguez was supposed to announce the next day he was coming to Alabama, whatever. And that morning, I get a call from the guy inside Sexton's office again. He goes, "I've got good news for you." And I'm like, "Well, what could be good? You just said they're about to make the biggest mistake in history." He said, "Rodriguez isn't coming." He said, "What I want you to do is just go on your board and tell them Rodriguez isn't coming." And he said, over the next 3 or 4 weeks, it's going to go real quiet. He said, "But Mark, what I'm telling you, 1st of January, Alabama's going to offer the job to Nick Saban, and he'll be the guy." And anyway, it was a long 3 or 4 weeks because there was a lot of speculation.
You post that, people think you're crazy.
Oh, man. ESPN's reporting that Rodriguez is going to be the next guy.
And here you are on Tider Insider.
I trust my guy inside Sexton's office. And I just said, look, guys, looks like Rodriguez is staying at West Virginia. And, posters were jumping on me. One said, "Hey, look, you need to get off the Saban bandwagon. He was never coming." And 30 minutes after I posted that, 30 minutes, ESPN report. Now, I'm breathing hard now. I'm breathing heavy because
your reliability is important. Your credibility.
I got a lot at risk here. 30 minutes after I post that, ESPN reports sources in Morgantown, West Virginia are feeling more and more confident that Rodriguez is staying there. And I was like, whew.
Yeah, I'm not the only one.
But like I said, it was a long 3 or 4 weeks in between that and when Saban was hired. But I will say this: of all the moments I've had as an Alabama fan, a lot of great moments, and I'm talking about even with Nick Saban, the championships that he won, second 26 with Tua, all these great moments in Alabama football history. When I found out that Nick Saban was definitely the head coach, I don't know that there's been a better moment.
You knew.
I knew. I didn't know he was going to win all these championships, but I knew
he was going to right the ship.
He was the guy.
Yeah. Well, since the book came out before Saban retired, if you could write some more in the book about Saban retiring from Rodney Orr's Tider Insider perspective, tell us that story. Yeah.
Well, that's real interesting, too, because I've got someone close in the media that is in a different field, but we share a lot of information. And he called me last summer. He said, "Rodney," he said, "I'm hearing a lot about Coach Saban possibly stepping down at the end of the year." And I said, "Yeah, I'm hearing it too." And he said, "It's got a different feel to it." And I said, "Yeah, it kind of does." And he just said this. He said, "Look," he said, "if this happens, you need to keep an eye on Kalen DeBoer at Washington." He said, "I think he might be the guy." And I'm like, okay. So he calls me back. That's in July, August last year, and calls me back a few months later. And we have a long conversation. He said, "Rodney, this is really picking up steam." DeBoer's not signing his contract at Washington, the extension they wanted to give him, the raise and all of this. And so I really think this is all coming together. And right before Alabama played Michigan in the playoff game, the Rose Bowl, got a phone call that said ESPN's on high alert. You know, they're expecting Saban to eventually step down. They didn't know exactly when, but within the next week or two, whatever. And then it happened. And I was kind of prepared for Kalen DeBoer, to be honest with you. I had been kind of tipped off that he was going to be the guy, but I still didn't know 100%. You know, you never really know how it's going to play out. But yeah, so I kind of had an idea it was going to be DeBoer for a while.
Well, were you putting that on your site?
Yeah, well, again, you have to be careful
yeah.
because people were getting angry that the media continued to bring up Nick Saban may step down because they think there's some kind of conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, maybe it's because, I'll never forget I posted this, maybe it's because Kalen DeBoer hasn't signed that extension on his desk. And I think over 28 years I've been doing Tighter Insider, they can read me a little bit, and they're like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
There's something to this. So to this day, they keep coming back. T.I., they call me T.I.
Yeah.
T.I. already knew it was DeBoer.
Well, it's Rodney Orr with Tighter Insider, and of course he and Gary Harris on WVUA out of Tuscaloosa. Tighter Insider TV on Tuesday nights at 6:30.
6:30
right?
live and 10:30 the
replays
replay,
later on. So all across the state, you got throngs of watchers and viewers and listeners. And man, just thank you for writing the book. Really encouraged me, challenged me, and I know it will many other people as well. RodneyOrr.com, and if people want to reach out to you, order the book, give it away, give it to people who need to hear the messages contained, and have Rodney come out and be a part of your church group or men's group or family night, whatever, and let him tell this story. And I believe the Lord's going to really use you to make a big difference. Continue to do so.
Yeah, I look forward to it, Greg, and I certainly appreciate it. Let me say this too. If people want to reach out to me, it's real simple. Rodney@TighterInsider.com.
Okay.
They can email me, Rodney@TighterInsider.com.
Okay. And we'll post all that on our site
Sure.
so people can go there. Rodney@TighterInsider.com.
Correct.
All right. Real pleasure to meet you and to read your book and to sit with you for a little bit. I sure appreciate your time, sir.
No, I appreciate it, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.